Hey guys, what's up and welcome to another Dacasa Film product review. This is not a tutorial. Well, I guess it is a tutorial about the Blackmagic 4K camera. Now, it's the Blackmagic Cinema camera, the Blackmagic 4K, I don't know. I'm just gonna call it the Blackmagic 4K camera. So basically what I'm gonna talk about is I'm gonna go through its features. I'm gonna talk about what I like about it, what I don't like about it, some pros and cons, and show you a little bit of test footage that I shot with it over the weekend. Managed to get my hands on one, which really wasn't too hard. I just rented it, so it's not a big deal. I do go in depth into the menus. So if you want to skip ahead to the menu portion of the video, you can skip ahead and you can click here and skip ahead to it. But for now, I'm just going to talk about, in theory, what it does, and in theory, you know, just things about it that I like. As of right now, it is March 2nd, 2014. The camera is only a few weeks old. It's only been out for a little while. So there's still a lot of things that Blackmagic is planning to release as firmware updates in the future. So you're gonna hear me say a lot, in the future, they're gonna have a firmware update to update the certain aspects of it. So if you're watching this months from now and those firmware updates have been added and they are available for download, I will link them here or put a link in the description, and anything I say about future of firmware updates is probably null and void at this point. But for right now, if you're watching this within the first couple of weeks or months that this video is up, this is the camera as it is now. So if anything, this is a nice look back to see how it once was before all you people of the future have been able to utilize other aspects of the camera. So just as a disclaimer, if you're subscribed to me because you like my beginner filmmaking tutorials, this one is not very beginner. This video is catered toward people who are interested in knowing more about the 4K camera, and you're gonna need sort of a basic knowledge of cinematography and camera features in order to understand this. I'm not gonna go into depth as to what everything is, because it would just take too long. If you want to know anything more about beginner photography, check out my Filmmaking 101 and Photography 101 tutorial right here. So first things first, let's look at the design. It looks exactly the same to the 2.5 camera, the 2.5K camera. This is an EF mount on here. Now I think that's one of the differences. I think the Blackmagic Cinema camera, the 2.5K, you could do micro 4/3 mount. I don't think this one does micro 4/3. This is an EF mount, just native, that takes Canon lenses, the Canon EF mount. This is a 24mm 1.4 prime. I rented this as well. Sexy lens. And it goes right on beautiful. Has this weird sort of, you know, receiver for the lens, this sort of thing that comes out. I think it's pretty cool. So basically the camera is just this box. Now I rented the camera from a place called Adorama. It's an awesome, awesome rental place in New York City. It came with this cage. This is a brand called Wooden. This is Wooden Camera. Safety Nano is the words here. I don't know what that means. But it's a pretty cool little cage that this comes on. And they also, Adorama also supplies you with these small rails here and a mount for a battery. This is an Anton Bauer battery. So I'm powering the camera via this battery. But basically the camera itself is this little box right up here. Just this thing, not the metal cage, just this little guy. This is the part that costs $3,000. So pretty cheap. But look what Adorama gives you. In order to use the thing, you need some other features. And that's one of the cons of the camera in terms of like money. Yes, the camera is a $3,000 camera and it's cheap and you're getting 4K for $3,000, that's nuts. But you still need a lot of other accoutrements to get the thing to work. You need a battery because it has an internal battery, but it only lasts for like 20, 25 minutes from what I hear. I didn't actually do that test. But you can't you can't go out and do a shoot using the internal battery. You'll be screwed because then your camera dies and you need to go plug it in and wait a while before you can shoot again. And that's not cool. So you really need some extra power. You'll also need the record medium. This records on solid state hard drives. This is a SanDisk Extreme 2 solid state hard drive. These can run you some money too. These can be like $300-400. And Adorama supplies you with this awesome cage and rails so that they all go in a nice little package. But this cage is probably another $1,000. I don't know, I didn't really check. And then they also give you, Adorama also gives you a dock for the hard drive. So you put the dock in here. And this particular dock is called Sound Devices. That's the brand. It has an eSATA port. It has a FireWire 800 port and a USB 3 port, which is cool. It's a nifty little thing. Doesn't need power. It just powers from the ports. So that's a lot of stuff that Adorama gives you. In other words, that's a lot of stuff that you need. Now, I didn't have to rent this and rent this and rent that and rent that. I didn't have to rent all that. When you just get the cinema camera, when you get the 4K camera from Adorama, all this other stuff comes with the package because they know you need all that stuff. So that's what's great. So it's pretty awesome. They give you all this other stuff so that you can actually use the thing. Otherwise, you'd have to rent the bower, you'd have to rent the plate, you have to rent the rails, you have to rent the cage, you have to rent the hard drives, you have to rent the dock. That's going to cost you a lot of money. So, and I mean, I'm just going to be, honest with you guys. There's no reason to hide it. It costs $250 to rent for the weekend. So I picked it up on Thursday afternoon at about 6 o'clock. So I had it all day Friday, all day Saturday. Today's Sunday. I'm doing the review, late in the weekend, and I'm bringing it back Monday morning before 9:30. Now, this video is not sponsored by Adorama at all. I just go there a lot, and they're awesome, and they hook you up. So if you're in the New York area and you need to rent from someplace, that's a good place to go. There's also Do-All on 29th Street. Do-All is great. We rented a bunch of stuff, me and my buddy Cody, we rented a bunch of stuff from them. They're more cinema oriented. They're much more knowledgeable about lenses and old school, and they have film cameras. So I don't want to just pump Adorama, also I want to pump Do-All because they're awesome too. So that is a con of the camera in terms of just the equipment you need. If you were going to buy a cinema camera package, you'd need to take into account that you need to spend at least another $2,000 on other things. The batteries, the cage, the rails, the hard drives, the dock, all that stuff. So even though it's like cinema, 4K for $3,000, you still got to think about the other stuff. So that's a con. If you're renting it, that's not that big of a con. It's just, part of the package. In terms of the camera itself, there are some pros and cons. Now, if you're watching this and you're a DSLR user, a DSLR videographer, or cinematographer using DSLRs, it's going to feel very limiting in a lot of ways, but you get 4K, so that's cool. Basically, I'm going to be comparing this camera to DSLRs and the Red Scarlet or the other 4K cameras out there, because this guy sits somewhere in the middle. So since this is a little more advanced, and since I'm not going to go into depth into explaining what all these things are, I'm just going to list the features. So this is basically just a list of the features of the camera. As of right now, as of March 2014, the camera has 2 recording modes. They're both Apple ProRes HQ, but you have your standard HD, which is 1920 by 1080, but you also have your 4K resolution, which is 3840 by 2160. Now these are both 16:9 aspect ratio. So basically your standard widescreen, your TV and the player, the YouTube player that you're watching this on are 16:9 aspect ratio. You could also call it 1.77 to 1 if you want to do the math. Now I said I wasn't going to go into depth into a lot of things, but I wanted to go into depth about what 4K is just really quick. You've probably heard by now 4K. You've probably heard, 4K is the next thing. Netflix is going to be streaming in 4K soon, and you can go buy a 4K TV. Right now, you're watching this in YouTube and you're watching it in 1080p. You've probably heard that. You've probably heard before, I'm going to go buy a TV. Oh, is that 1080? Yeah, that's 1080, or is that 720? Is it 720 or is it 1080? So you've probably heard HD and you've probably heard 1080 somewhere. So you know that 1080 is HD, right? And what is 1080? So if this is your standard 16:9 frame, it's 1080 lines of resolution going this way. So there's 1,080 lines. In the old school standard definition, now this is not to scale, there was 480 lines of resolution this way. So this is standard def, which is, well, let's think about it. If this is 10,000, then that's about 500, so about here would be standard definition. And then also, this was 4:3, so this was 640 by 480. So let me think. It's probably around here. So this is just a guess, but this is standard definition and this is 1080, right? But no one ever talks about the other number. No one ever talks about the 1920. So it's 1920 lines of resolution this way. So 1,920 lines of resolution this way. That's what we know today as 1080p. Then you hear 4K, and you're like, oh, you got to get the new thing. It's 4K. And that's the confusing thing. Well, everyone is used to calling HD by this number. Everyone is used to HD being 1080. So when you hear 4K, which is 4,000, you think it's this number is 4,000. You think it's the lines of resolution going this way. But it's not. 4K is referring to the front number. So you can see 38 is very close to 4,000. Basically, if you round it up, it's 4,000. We went from calling HD by this number to now calling HD by this number. And it's very confusing. But so now you've got almost 4,000. So it's almost double this, right? 1920. So let's say that's 2,000. So let's say double. So out to here, right? Now we have 4,000 lines this way by 2160. So now it's more than double. Well, it's about double this way too. So 1,080. So now another 1,000 to here, right? So now this is 4K in resolution. So now you have 2160 by. So look at the difference. Basically, 4K is 4 of these HDs put together. So if you were to take your TV, you have a 42-inch plasma screen, you have a 1080p plasma screen at home. If you were to take your TV and put 4 of them, stack them next to each other, that's the resolution that this camera shoots in. So that's pretty cool. It's very high quality, it's very high resolution. The part I won't get into is that this technically isn't 4K. This is technically Ultra HD. 4K is another format. Other cameras, like the Scarlett or the Epic, they record in 4K, not UHD, they record in 4K, which is the same lines of resolution going this way. It's still 2160, but it's a little bit wider. So true 4K is actually 4,096 by 2160. And that's called the DCI standard. That's the Digital Cinema Initiatives standard. So when you hear 4K, you have to think, well, is it 4K, standard 4K, or is it UHD? Standard 4K is a different aspect ratio. Standard 4K is 1.9 to 1. So there's a lot of things going on here. You have the standard DCI 4K, which some cameras record in this, which is 1.9 to 1 aspect ratio. You have UHD, which is 3840 by 2160, which is 16 by 9 aspect ratio, a little bit smaller. So basically, standard 4K is just a little bit wider. That's just a little bit, not that much. So it's okay. So once again, this camera has 2 record modes. It has 1920 by 1080 HD, and it has 3840 by 2160 UHD. They are both 16 by 9 aspect ratio. And these are both, at this moment in time, Apple ProRes HQ. In the future, they're going to release a firmware update that will give you Cinema DNG. So what can we add to our list of pros? 4K. Pretty cool. For relatively cheap. What else can we add to list of pros? Here's one. This one's pretty cool. People love this one. The global shutter. Now, what does that mean? If you know anything about 5Ds, you know about the rolling shutter, the jello effects, and this camera does not have that. When you pan really quick, nothing gets weird and distorted. And to demonstrate that, here's a little test I shot. So here's a 5D. I'm shooting at a lamp, and I'm whipping the camera back and forth. And if I freeze the image, you can see a distortion in the lamp. It's at a diagonal. It looks weird. It's because of the rolling shutter. If we go to the Blackmagic footage, you can see that I'm whipping back and forth at the same speed, same exposure, same shutter speed, and there is no rolling shutter distortion. So now you're getting a relatively cheap camera. It's probably the cheapest camera out there that has a global shutter. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that. Another neat little thing that it does that's a pro is a time lapse. That's pretty cool. So you can do pretty cool time lapses in camera with it. Click here to skip ahead to see the test I did for the time lapse, or you can just wait until we get to that section of the video. Another pro is that it takes EF lenses, it takes your Canon lenses right onto it. I think there's also another version that takes PL lenses, the more cinema lenses, the very, very expensive ones. But if you already have a 5D Mark II, if you already have a 7D, if you already are using a Canon DSLR, if you own them already, then this thing will take your lenses. So that's a money saver right there because you won't need to spend money on different lenses. So that's cool. One of the things that I consider a pro about the camera is something that it does over the Scarlett. If you're shooting in 4K on the Scarlett, the red Scarlett, and you switch to 2K, you switch to HD, the field of view crops. So you're basically only using this much of the sensor. So that sucks because like if you want to get a wide shot and for some reason, like let's say you want to do something in slow motion. So you switch to 2K so you can up the frame rate to like 120 frames a second. But when you switch to 2K, it crops in and now you can't see anything anymore. So that's something that happens with the red at least, and some other film cameras, some other digital cinema cameras out there. But this one, if you're on 4K and you're at 24 millimeters, when you switch to HD, you're still at 24 millimeters. You don't lose any field of view, which is really cool. They do something called downscaling, which takes everything in the frame, everything in the shot, and downscales it to HD. So that's a definite pro. So I'm referring to that as no field of view loss. This might be just something that I find cool, but another pro that I like is that you can switch lenses as you're recording. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, you might want to switch lenses while you're recording if you're recording a live event and you don't want to cut. Like let's say you're shooting something with two cameras. You got a buddy on a 7D and you're on a 5D and you're shooting a wedding. In post, you want to make sure you have long record times so that when you sync them up, they don't, you know what I mean? You don't want to keep cutting up and have all this shit to like resync in post. So you can just have one long take and it's much easier to sync up in post. So I could see a situation where you're recording, and let's say you're recording audio separately, and you don't want to cut because you don't have to resync. You can literally take the lens off the camera while it's recording and switch lenses and put it on while it's recording, and you won't have to worry about that. That could be something that I find useful and nobody else is going to do, but I think it's pretty cool. If you do that with the 5D, if you're recording with the 5D and you disengage the lens, it stops recording and it shuts off. So you can change lenses while you're recording. I think that's cool. Just be careful when you do it. You don't get any crap in there that hits the sensor. Before I get on to cons, I just want to list something that is true. It's not necessarily a con, depending on your frame of reference, but it's just something that's true. The sensor of this camera is a Super 35mm sensor. It's a 4K sensor. It's about the same size as a 7D. So if any DSLR filmmakers out there are familiar with the 5D, 7D crop factor, that applies to this camera. Now, if you're not a DSLR filmmaker and you've always shot on Super 35mm cameras, this will not matter to you. But if you have a 5D, the sensor in the 5D is a 5K sensor. Even though it doesn't shoot at 5K, it shoots at 1080, but it's a 5K sensor. So when you put a lens on the 5D, you put that same lens on a 7D, it's going to crop, it's going to zoom in. You're going to have less field of view. In fact, from the 5D to the 7D, it's a 1.6 times crop factor. So if you have a 100mm lens on a 5D, if you put that onto a 7D, it will be a 160mm lens on a 7D, but not really. It would be the equivalent to a 160mm lens on a 5D. So 100mm lens on a 7D would be like having a 160mm lens on a 5D. Your field of view gets narrowed because the sensor is smaller. So this is not a 5K sensor. This is a 4K sensor, a Super 35mm sensor. So you're going to get the 1.6 times magnification. If you're used to shooting with a 5D, you're going to get the 1.6 magnification. If you're used to shooting with a 7D, it's going to look exactly the same. And to prove this, here's a little test I shot. So on the left side of frame, that's the Blackmagic at 24mm. And on the right side of frame, that is the 5D at 24mm. You can see the difference in field of view. The 5D looks a lot wider because the sensor is a lot bigger. So let's say, for instance, you're doing a location scout. Bring a 7D with you. You're going to get the same field of view on the 7D as you would on this camera. Now that's not really a con. It's just a truth of the camera. Now on to the cons. And unfortunately, I think the cons might outweigh the pros, depending on what you want to do. The big, I mean, this right here, 4K, that sort of is a huge pro. So there's a lot of cons you have to put up with because you're getting 4K for a cheap price. What I consider to be the biggest con of the camera is the limited ISOs. As of this moment, March 2014, you only have 200, 400, and 800 ISO. That's it. That's all you have to work with. Whereas with the 5D and the 7D, you have 100, 160, 250, 320, 400, the list goes on and on. 640, 800, 1250, 1600, 2500, 3200. You have a million to work with, and they all go on 1/3 stops up. So if you're used to the 5D and the 7D, you have a lot of ISO room to play with. With this, 3 steps. The brightest you can get is 800. So that lends itself to saying that this camera is not that great in low light. If you're in a really dark situation, even with a fast lens, even with the 1.4, if it's really dark, you can't go any higher than 800, and that's tough, It's tough for a run and gun situation, or a situation where you don't have control. If you're shooting with this camera in a controlled environment, in a set where you have lights and you can tweak things and you can add more light, then it's not a problem. But if you're doing a run and gun shoot, or you're going into a situation where you don't have any control, bring some fast lenses. And even then, pray that there's at least something in the room that has some sort of illumination. Another con, as of right now, there are limited frame rates. As of right now, there are 6. 23.98, your standard film style video. 24 even, 25 even, 29.97, your standard video frame rate, and 30 even. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I obviously can't count. There's 5. So it doesn't do 60 frames a second for like any kind of slow-mo. It doesn't do anything faster than that. So you can't do any kind of, really you can't do any kind of slow-mo. You can do time lapses, which would give you the equivalent of like 12 frames a second or 8 frames a second, but you can't do any kind of slow-mo. I mean, the most you can do is shoot at 30 and then conform it down to do, a slight slow-mo, but very limited there. Something that's also a con, but not that bad, are the white balance settings. There's only about 6. So you get 3200, 4500, 5000, 5600, 6500, and 7500K. So not that many to pick one. I mean, with the 5D, you can dial it in by the hundreds. You can go from like 2700 all the way up to like 10,000, and you can go in like 100 increments, 27, 2800, 2900, 30, 31, 32. I'm pretty sure you can just go until you're happy. Now, the thing is, yeah, it's limiting, but you're gonna color correct anyway, right? The thing is with this camera is it records in such a high quality, there's a lot of data there, it's a lot less compressed than what the Mark III shoots or the Mark II shoots. So there's a lot of room in there to adjust the color even further. Whereas with the 5D or the DSLRs, you kind of want to get your white balance as good as you can on set. That way you're not going crazy color correcting because you could lose some information. This situation, you're getting high quality ProRes HQ, and there's a lot to work with. What I consider to be a con is the fact that it's not true 4K. Having shot a film on the red, you get used to the aspect ratio, the 1.9 to 1 of 4K. And when you hear 4K, as a cinematographer, you know when something was shot on 4K because, yeah, you might be looking at a 1080p version of it. You might be looking at a low-res version of it, so you're not seeing it in 4K, but you know it was 4K because you can see that it's a little bit wider. You can see the little black bars on the top and bottom if you're watching it in a 16:9 frame. So with this, it's like you can shoot it in 4K, but if you're going to out-res it to HD anyway, it's might be hard to tell that it was shot in 4K. I mean, you can shoot this in HD, and it looks pretty damn good. To me, it's almost the same. So you have to ask yourself, what is your output going to be? Are you going to be screening this film in a theater with a 4K projector? If that's the case, then maybe, yeah, definitely you want to get it in 4K. Or, you know what I mean? Like, at what point will you notice? At what point will your display, your TV or your image, your theater, at what point will it get so large that if you shot it in HD, it's going to look weird? It's going to look not as clear. I don't know. I've actually heard that you can't tell the difference with your eye between HD and 4K unless it's around 80 inches. Once you get to 80 inches, if you shot it in HD, once you get that big and you're like 20 feet away, then you can tell, oh, okay, yeah, that's starting to look not as clear. But who has an 80-inch TV? You know what I mean? Who has an 80-inch screen in their room? I don't know. That's a whole other debate to get into. That's a whole other debate. Regardless, this doesn't shoot in what I consider 4K. It shoots in what I consider UHD. As a person who doesn't care, not a big deal. But as a person who's shot 4K movies before, you might be disappointed. I was disappointed. And one of the basic cons is that you need more equipment than just the camera. Now, when you go out to buy a DSLR, it comes with a battery that, you know, comes out, you charge it. You might pick up another one for like, you know, 80, 90 bucks. It usually comes with a memory card, you know, but you can get another one for like, you know, 80, 90 bucks. Yeah, there's other things you need. You obviously need a lens for it, but you can come with a kit lens. So, you know, in other words, the accoutrements that you need for a DSLR are not as expensive as the accoutrements you need for this camera. You need one of these batteries. You need some other battery to power it. You can't just go off the internal battery. It's not practical unless you are only going to go out and shoot something for 5 minutes. You need something, and these can get expensive. You know, these are professional batteries that are designed to go with many different other cameras. Whereas if you buy a DSLR, you're just buying Canon's battery for it, so it's $100. Whereas this can be a couple $100 or more. This can be $450, $500, and you're gonna need at least two, because once one dies, you need to put another one on, and then put that one on charge, and then you need the battery charger, and that's another couple $100. So it's like, you need more than just the camera. It's great that the camera is $3,000. When they announced it, they said it was going to be $4,000, so it's come down in price $1,000, which is amazing. Which leads me to believe that those firmware updates in the future they might charge for them. I hope not, but you never know. And then, of course, you need to have a way to connect the battery to the camera. There's no way to just stick this battery on the camera, so that's why you need this contraption. You need this crazy cage. This one is by Wooden Camera. And this is a great contraption. It's got all of these holes. You can mount a million things on this, which is great. And what Adorama gave me were some rails and this battery plate that the battery goes onto. So you can see, this would be the battery. This is the plate that has a wire that goes into the DC in here. Once again, it's not really a con. It's just sort of the nature of the beast. You can't just use the camera by itself. Obviously, you need a lens, but I'd assume by now you're either going to rent them, or I'd assume people who are going to think about buying this are people who have DSLRs anyway. And if that's the case, then you have your Canon lenses. And obviously, there's adapters for anything. If you have Nikon lenses, they sell adapters to have, you know, you put the adapter on and then you can put your Nikon glass on here. Another con going with this is also your audio. The camera's audio is not good at all. You're very rarely going to use the on-camera mic to record audio. So you're going to need another thing to record audio, a Zoom or some other kind of box to like hook up to it, especially if you want to do XLR inputs. The camera doesn't have XLR inputs, it has 1/4-inch inputs. So you're going to need some box that can take XLR and output 1/4-inch. On top of that, as far as I can know, I mean, I looked, the camera doesn't have an auto level for audio. I brought this camera to my band practice with me. Super loud environment, and this is what I wanted to test. And I put the audio levels all the way down, manually put them down to 1%, and still the noise was overmodulating. It's in a loud environment, you're screwed. This is not the type of camera to rely solely on the camera's audio input. You definitely need some other device like the H4n or a Tascam or something like that. If you have a device where you can control the levels there and have an auto level there and then output that to the camera, that could work, that could be okay. But the camera itself does not have an auto, like the 5D. I brought my 5D to a band practice, and it brings the audio down so much that nothing really gets overmodulated, and that's awesome. This camera, no such thing. So, not great audio. So that's what I think about the camera. Those are my pros and cons. Just a quick recap. The cons: limited ISOs, only 3. Limited frame rates, only 5. White balance, not so bad, only 6. Not true 4K. You need more than just the camera, and the audio is not that great. But as a pro, 4K. Not really 4K, but damn. And what's great about the 4K too is, like, a situation you could get into is you're recording in 4K and you want to like zoom in. You want to get a close-up. So if you're recording in 4K, let's say you're doing an interview in 4K and you want to punch in, if you're outputting in 1080, you got no loss. You can punch into a tight close-up and it's still 1080. You're not going to lose any data there, and it's going to still be really crystal clear, which is great. And that's a good thing about 4K. The global shutter, that's awesome. It can do time lapses, super cool. EF lenses, so you can use the lenses you already own. No field of view loss, even though if you switch from 4K to 1080, you're no crop. And you can change the lens while you're recording. I think that's pretty cool. So now I'm going to go into the menu of the camera, and we're going to go through the whole menu. So here we are, we're looking at the back of the Blackmagic Cinema camera, 4K. You can't really tell what you're looking at because this video is 1080 and the back of this LCD screen is not in 4K. But if I were to hit record right now and record me over here, it would definitely be in 4K. So really I'm just standing here as a joke because this is kind of funny. But let me talk you through the menu system so we can see what's going on here. So here's the LCD screen. There are 7 buttons down here. We've got the power. So if I click and hold, it shuts off. Hey, you can see my reflection. That's cool. Click and hold, it'll boot up. It's a pretty quick boot, not that bad. We have our status bar down here. This tells you what I'm recording in. We're recording in ProRes 4K of the 2 modes that there are. This is our f-stop, frames per second. This is telling us about the SSD, the solid state hard drive. It's telling us if we're ready to record, and we are. If I were to take out the SSD, which is in here, it would say no SSD. There it says no SSD. Here it is right here. This is a SanDisk Extreme. It's just a regular solid state hard drive. This is a 240 gig, which would give approximately 36 minutes, I believe. 240 gigs, 36 minutes in 4K. In HD, I'm not too sure, actually. We'll put it back in. This is the record time. If I were to hit this button to record, you'll start to see the time code going. It tells you how long you've been recording for. Shut that off. This is our ISO, or ASA in this instance. They refer to it as ASA. This is our shutter angle. This camera does not do shutter speeds like you would be familiar with them in DSLR world. This camera does shutter angles. I should do a video on shutter angles. Once I do, I will post it and link to it right here. This is our white balance. Right now I'm set to 5600K. And this is our power. Right now I'm hooked up to a battery, an external battery, so I should be good on power. The thing about this camera is it doesn't go down like 99, 98, 97. In this camera, it'll go 75. And then as it's approaching 75, you'll see it go 75, 100, 75, 100, 75, 100. And as time goes, it'll just click to 75. And the same, you keep going down to 50. It'll say 50, 75, 50, 75, 50, 75, 50, 50. And then it'll just stay on 50 until you get to the end. Before we get into the menus, I'll just talk through the rest of the buttons. Obviously, this is the record button you saw. The backwards and forwards buttons actually control the f-stop. So as you can see, I changed the f-stop from using these. I can go open, going this way, and darker, going this way. Kind of weird, but, you know, it's okay. It's not a touch screen like the red. You use this. The stop doesn't do anything, but if you hit play, you're going to go into your playback mode. And this is the clip. As you can see, my hand is, I'm waving my hand, this is a thumbnail. And you can hit play, and it's playing. Hit stop, and it goes back to live view. If you double tap, it zooms in, and you can adjust your focus. Double tap again to come out of it. If you tap once, it brings up your apparently birds of the wetlands. So I rented this camera, and maybe this was the last thing that it was used for. I'm not sure. Or maybe this is just a stock thing that comes with the camera. I'm not sure. That's funny. We can click in here, and we can delete this. I'll just go bird, enter. So now we're in bird, reel 1. We can change all this stuff, which is pretty cool. Enter your metadata. Click save to save. I might as well save. So we're saved now. So if you click one time, you can put in some metadata. Hit enter or hit menu to get out of there. So here's the iris and here's the focus button. So let me show you what that is. Now if I don't hit the focus button, I'm just have to use my eyes to tell if I'm in focus. If I hit the focus button, what ends up happening is you see peaking. So you see there on my finger the little bits of green. I'm adjusting the focus so you can see more of it. So basically the edges pop. Fingers are hard to use. So right there, it's telling me that that's in focus. That's called peaking, and on this camera it's set to green. So I know that that's in focus. If I turn off the focus button, it's gone. Not there anymore. So it's a good focus assist. Now what the iris button does is kind of weird. I'm going to stay away from the iris button. What the iris button does is it finds the hottest part of your frame. And I don't know if you can see this, but right up here there are some zebras. So that's the brightest part of the frame. So even if it's a tiny part of your frame, it takes the brightest part and it exposes for that. It auto exposes for that. So here, watch. All right, so that's everything besides the menu button. If we hit the menu button, we start on the default, which is camera settings, but there are 4 submenus. First one on the top is camera settings. Camera ID, I guess you can name this camera whatever you want to call it. You can input your date, that's the date right now. You can input the time, that's the time right now. This is where you would also change your ISO, which they refer to as ASA number, interesting. 200, 400, or 800. Whether that's going to change in the future, hopefully it will, but right now all you've got are 3. You have your white balance, I have it set to 5600K, but you can see, now you can't dial it in per hundreds, you have just a few settings. 32, 45, 5000, 56, 65, 7500, and 32. And then we have shutter angle. In the cinema world, they go by angle, they go by degrees, rather than by, in the photography world, they go by fractions of a second. Without having to explain shutter angle, I can show you how many settings we have of them. The fastest shutter angle we have is 45 degrees, which at 24 frames a second equals around 192 shutter, or 1/192. The next step up is 90 degrees, which would be 1/96th of a second if we're at 24 frames per second. And I won't keep doing this. So 45, 90, 108, 144, 172, 180, which is standard. And then slower shutter speeds, we have 216, 270, 324, and 360. Now at 24 frames a second, a 360 shutter angle would be 1/24th. But we'll keep it on 180 for now. So not many. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 options for shutter. You know, you can't dial it in per degree. If you want to put it at 47.8 degrees shutter angle, you can't. You only have a set amount. So next submenu is our audio. Now this is for the on-camera audio, what's being recorded to this. Now, pretty much if you're using this camera, you're going to have separate system audio anyway. You're going to have someone with some sort of audio recorder with a boom mic, and really this is just for scratch. So if you know you're in like a loud situation, you might want to put your mic levels down. You might want to, keep one low and one a little bit hotter just in case. And then for playback, your speaker volume could be, if it's loud out and you want someone to hear the scratch audio, If you really are worrying about the in-camera audio, you should definitely be wearing headphones so you can hear when things are overmodulated or not. No auto levels, at least not yet. So next submenu is your record format, your recorder settings. Right now there's only two. There's Apple ProRes HQ, and in 4K or in HD. And here's the dynamic range right here. Now you have two options, film or video. Now, I don't want to go into this too much, but basically your film setting is your flat, basic S-Log, neutral, dynamic range looking, low saturation look. It's the one you would shoot on if you're going to be doing lots of, not lots of, but if it's your standard thing you would be filming on, I would shoot at this. It's knowing that in post you're going to have to do some color grading to it, adjust the levels and stuff like that. If you're shooting on video, this would be like, if you're using a 5D, this would be like your standard picture style. This would be a neutral picture style. This would be your standard picture style. So it's kind of baking into the footage a certain curve, a certain thing. The blacks are a little blacker, the whites are a little, whiter, the levels are crushed, and also the saturation is much higher. And the way that this camera runs with this log, with this Rec 709, with this dynamic range setting, is it runs a bit orange, a bit yellowy, somewhat yellow-greeny, I think. It's okay. I would just shoot on film because then work with it in post. So we have the dynamic range set to film, and you can see how it looks. Pretty flat. This is what you want to see as a filmmaker because you're going to have good footage to work with in post. But let's change it to video, and you can see the difference. Much more saturation here. You can see my zebras are coming on, telling me that this part of the frame is overexposed. So in this log, in this setting, these are a little bit overexposed. Whoops. So you're having less dynamic range. You're crunching the levels. This back here is darker. This area of the frame is darker, and these areas are brighter. Are you going to be able to fix that? Can you bring that down in post? I'm not sure. Can you bring this up in post? I'm not sure. You have less to work with. But you have an overall, in other words, it's kind of pre-graded for you. Also, I have some test footage that I shot on the Glide Cam that I'll show you. Next would be your frame rate. I'm on 23.98. Next one up would be just 24. Next one up, 25. Next one up, 29.97. And next one up, 30. And that's it. And then time-lapse interval. Now, I haven't done any time-lapse yet, but apparently, I guess it takes a frame every 2 frames, 1 frame every 3 frames. I'm not exactly sure. 1 frame every 1 second, 1 frame every 2 seconds. Let's try it out. Let's try it out right now. So let's do 1 every second. Time-lapse interview. So I'm assuming it's 1 frame every second. So let's try this out. I think I did every 1 second. So here's the time-lapse. So 1 second. Let me see. Oh, it does 2 frames. You can see down here it's doing 2 frames. Cool. 9, 10. Let's try it out. All right, now let's play it back, see what happens. Okay, hitting play. Ha! That's cool. So that was a couple of frames, I guess, every second. Let's watch it again. So that's the recorder settings. Last one is our display settings. Now I have the brightness all the way down because if I put it all the way up, it's just going to get a little too bright, and then I'd have to iris down on this camera, but then you can't, then everything else gets really dark. So this dynamic range is basically what's coming out of the to the monitor. It's not what you're seeing on this LCD screen. Now zebras are the areas of the frame that are overexposed. I have it set to 90% of complete white. If you set it to 100%, you're basically, the zebras only pop up when something is completely blown out, completely white. Now this is saying SDI overlays, SDI output. This has to do with your monitor out. This camera does not have HDMI out, it has an SDI out. So if it did have an HDMI out, it would say HDMI overlays, or if it would say HDMI output. So basically your monitor out, what do you want overlaid. You want your status, which would be this bar. In other words, if you have a client who's with you and you're shooting and you have a client, do you want your client to be able to see this information here? Not necessarily, but if you're a camera operator and your DP is sitting over by the monitor, maybe you want to have this here because your DP is looking at all this stuff. So that's the status. Guides, I think guides are just TV safe zones. They'll just put up these little boxes to make sure that you have everything in the shot and nothing's getting clipped. And then both. SDI output, you can set it to nothing but HD, apparently. I guess in future firmwares, there will be more options there. And that's all the menus. Really quick, let me just turn the camera sideways, and you can see our inputs over here. So up here is something called the remote. This would be your LANC, your lank control. That would be your remote start and stop, just something to have hit record on, or stop, or maybe something else will be released in the future. Now you can notice these are friggin' hard to get out. This would be the headphone jack. This is 1/4 inch inputs, channel 1 and channel 2 for audio. Not XLR, 1/4 inch only. Here's your SDI out. Oh man, it's a pain in the butt. Here's your SDI. This is a BNC connection. If you want to have an HDMI, you're gonna need a third-party box. So you need a third-party box if you want to do XLR. You need a third-party box if you want to do HDMI. You would need a SDI to HDMI converter. Here's the Thunderbolt connection. You can use this camera as a ultrascope or for color correction via the Thunderbolt, and I'm sure there's plenty other features that I don't know offhand. I don't know if you can dump footage using the Thunderbolt. I'm not sure. And then this would be power. What's cool is if I unplug the power, no loss. So you lose power, your camera's still gonna record. Now I just plugged it back in, even if I'm recording. So I'm recording. If I pull out the power, somebody hits me, trips me, camera kicks back into the internal battery. That's all the menus. That's everything. So those were the menus. Now I'm going to show you some test footage I shot over the weekend. Enjoy.
Get pretty close. You know what I mean? Like you're still in like a different mode.
Like a week sometimes to get back.
Surprise!
What are you doing?
Filming you guys being cute. So now the blacks are blacker, the whites are lighter, and it ups the saturation a lot. Yeah. But the thing is, in post, you have less.
Yeah. Hey, buddy. How's it going?
So that's my review of the 4K Blackmagic camera. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and happy filmmaking. Peace.